But Georgia, Clemson, one of the bigger games of this weekend. I'm so curious about Georgia here because they're Georgia, right? They've only lost to Nick Saban in the last like 4 years.
I think 2019 was the last time they lost to a non-Nick Saban coach team.
Yeah, and they obviously have all the talent. They're the favorite, preseason number ones, and they deserve it. But they've had all those off-season issues with players getting suspended. I don't know. I haven't really dove into how important a lot of those players are, and I know they're filled with talent, so just plug and play. But how do we feel about 13-point home favorites, Robert?
Yeah, well, it's technically it's a neutral site though. It's in Atlanta, so it depends on how you look at it. But
Home favorite.
because it's in it's here's where I think neutral site matters. It's because if this game was in Athens, it'd be 5% Clemson fans. In Atlanta, given how short a distance that is, and Clemson recruits Atlanta very heavily, it'll be at least a third, I think, Clemson fans in that game. So it won't be as lopsided in terms of the refereeing and officiating. The public, I assume, is still on Georgia. At least it's been that way all offseason, ever since they posted this line. It hit 14 briefly and immediately dropped back because there were people sitting on betting Clemson, waiting for it to hit 14. And every time it does, they bet Clemson. So if you're waiting on 14, you can try. The public, I think, will stay in on Georgia. Georgia is everybody's preseason favorite to win the national title, the biggest preseason favorite in the odds markets to win the national title. And I get it. Now, Georgia's not number one in talent. They're number two in talent. They're behind Alabama. And Ohio State's right there, right on their heels. Georgia has benefited from the East Division being weak for several years now. They're no longer in that East Division. There is no divisions left in the SEC. Now they got to go to Alabama. They got to go to Texas. I think all the hype on Georgia, I get we're back in the playoff system, and the assumption is that even if Georgia drops those two games, they'll be in the playoffs. I wouldn't necessarily bet on that myself. So there's a lot of, how do you win a national title game if you're not even in the playoffs? So I like Georgia, but I don't think they are quite as dominant as people seem to be thinking in the betting markets. And I get people being down on Clemson. In the transfer portal era, they're a very good team. They haven't been an elite team. And part of that was always going to happen because he was overachieving in recruiting. Clemson should have a top 15 recruiting class. It should not have a top 5 recruiting class. There's not enough. Clemson's utility is it's close enough to Atlanta to really dip into North Georgia. But you're competing with everybody in North Georgia. You're competing with Tennessee in North Georgia. You're competing with Alabama in North Georgia. You're competing with Auburn in North Georgia. And, of course, you're competing with Georgia in North Georgia. So when you look at it from a recruiting ranking perspective, Clemson should be a 15th to 20th ranked program, which is historically outside of Dabo Swinney what they've been. And I think some Clemson fans underappreciate how extraordinary Dabo's successes at Clemson have been. He kept landing on quarterback after quarterback after quarterback, running back after running back after running back. He always had trouble with depth, but he was getting NFL guys and beating out Nick Saban for those NFL guys. It was an incredible run. So of course they were going to take more of a step back, but they're still, if you look at their talent, a top 15 program. And here you can make an argument for Dabo not being involved in the transfer portal. He knows exactly what he's got coming in this year because these are development players that he recruited out of high school that have been there several years in the program. So he's not like the Florida State coach who thinks he has the best offensive and defensive lines in the country and then finds out from the nerds that he doesn't. So I think I look at this game and I'm going to take Clemson on the points. If you get it 14, great. I'd take it at 13.5, take it at 13. I think Clemson surprises some people. We'll see if in the second year of their offensive system can click. They've got some young, very super talented freshmen. There's some questions in Georgia's secondary. This is not the same defensive line that is stacking, the line for the Philadelphia Eagles right now. So it's an elite team. That I think will probably be more of a running team than a passing team this year. So if you like the under, that might be consideration. But Clemson hasn't had a bad defensive line in like a decade. And you look at it on paper, there's no reason why this defensive line shouldn't be an elite defensive line. And when you can do that against a team that is without Brock Bowers, without their top receiver from last year, that frankly Georgia hasn't recruited depth at wide receiver now under Kirby Smart all the way. He usually gets one guy, and that's it. And he just lost that number one tight end, number one wide receiver. Running back room should be better. That it's been a couple of years, so probably a little bit more. And I like the QB, but do you look at that QB and say this guy's going to be the top 5 pick in the future NFL draft? Not really. He's more of an old school Nick Saban, early era Alabama QB. Somebody's going to be the backup somewhere. So I'll take Clemson plus 13.5.
Do we have a teaser leg here, possibly? We do a little 6.5-point tease, get Clemson up to 20. You know, that kind of feels nice.
Absolutely.
Clemson's going to keep it close.
Or if you wait until it hits 14 and you snag him on a 7-point teaser, you get him at 21.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Cricket?
Yeah, I think this game right here is going to be played Mercedes-Benz Dome. Clemson will travel very well. It's not going to be like the Oregon game a couple years ago where you don't have near as many fans in the stands. It should be split about 50-50, maybe 60-40 Georgia, something like that. And Clemson, had their streak of 12 straight seasons with at least 10 wins snapped last year. Started out 4-4, struggled out the gate a little bit there. Wound up losing a game to Florida State, in which they never trailed in regulation and missed a game-winning field goal right there at the buzzer. So, this is still a solid team. Dabo's obviously a great coach right there. I would expect them to bounce back. It always scares me betting against these Georgia teams, but they also got some question marks there. And I'm not as high on Carson Beck as a lot of people are. I know the guy's a great player and everything, but I do think he's more like of an A.J. McCarron type guy, more of a game manager. I don't know that I know he's got great arm talent and all that, but I just haven't seen him really have to beat you with his arm yet in his career at Georgia because obviously all the talent around him there. But it does feel like 2 touchdowns could be too much in this one right here. Like I said, they're going to be fired up for this one. Dabo's going to have his guys ready to go there. Clemson was actually plus 92 yards per game in ACC play last year, despite that 4-4 record. Fumbles and missed field goals in the red zone was a big Achilles heel for these guys. The field goals should be much better this year. Got some more experience there. As long as you can hold on to the football, protect the football, this should be a much, much better team here. And I expect to see Clemson take, pretty much a pretty big step back to the top of the ACC where they've been for the last decade or so now this season. We obviously seen Florida State fall off. We saw that last weekend in the loss to Georgia Tech over in Dublin. So I think Clemson, I think it's a tall task to expect them to get a win in this game right here against the Georgia team that everybody expects to hoist the trophy in the end. But 13.5 feels like it could be too many points right here in this game. So I think I'm leaning Clemson as well.
I think I'm there with you guys. I'll probably end up teasing that one. But part of me is just like, I'm just going to probably stay back and just watch this game because I wouldn't be surprised if it's like 28-0 at half and Georgia's just dominating, because it is Georgia, right? I mean, like I've seen this story before.
Yeah.
There's better bets I think I can find throughout the week, and I could just sit back and enjoy a good football game, hopefully a good football game. But
they beat an Oregon team 49-3 a couple seasons ago. That was a pretty daggum good Oregon team.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I want to skip ahead to one